Welcome to episode 107 of Instant Expertise Marketing, the podcast where we give you practical ways to win back your time using AI. I'm Yvette Brown, co-founder of Xpromos, and I've spent the last year helping teams figure out how to actually use AI at work without needing a PhD or a prompt library the size of a phone book.
And I'm Sherry Nomadi. Yvette and I founded Xpromos back when fax machines were still really cool, and they were the fastest way to share documents with others. I mean, that is assuming that you both had a fax machine. And while Yvette and I are opposites in almost every single way possible,
True.
we always have aligned on how to help our clients get the greatest results.
Also true. So today's topic is one of the most requested, most misunderstood, and most essential skills for using AI effectively. It is prompting. It's about what to say, how to say it, and how to stop getting weird robot garbage instead of helpful content.
Well, that would be helpful. So let's be clear. Prompting is not magic. It is just asking smarter questions.
You know, as usual, Sherry, you're very succinct and you kind of nailed it on that one. As you guys know, we think of AI like a junior employee who's super fast, but kind of clueless, maybe doesn't have street smarts yet. So if you say to said junior employee or intern, write a social post, they'll give you something super generic, right? It might use best practices maybe, but it's going to be generic. But if you say to them, write a LinkedIn post about our webinar for B2B SaaS founders who care about churn and use a bold hook and stats, you're going to get a way better output.
And that's what I'm talking about, being smarter with your questions, right? So the biggest mistake we see is that people type in one really vague sentence and get a really vague, silly answer, and then they decide AI is not useful. To us, that would be like yelling, do marketing, more marketing into a walkie-talkie and expecting a full go-to market plan right there in return.
I love that example, do marketing. But we get it. You know, AI feels overwhelming at first, but there is a simple fix, and it's the 3 C's: context, clarity, and constraints. And we're going to break that down for you today.
So let's start with context. That's the background info. What's the scenario? What's the audience? What's the goal? And what role are you in when you're asking? What problem are you trying to solve?
That's exactly right, Sherry. It's like saying, I'm preparing for a Q2 board meeting, or I'm writing this as a brand manager talking to a skeptical CFO. This tells AI what situation it's stepping into.
And then there's clarity, which is all about the output. Be specific about what you want. Do you want 5 bullets, 1 paragraph? How about bold or conversational? Should you sound like a CEO or your favorite podcast host? All those things matter.
Yeah, and clarity is really kind of where the format lives. It's not just what you want, it's how you want it delivered. And this can get really mind-bending when you start to ask it to explain something like using metaphors, or deliver it at an 8th grade education or to a group of PhDs. Those outputs are all going to be very different.
Absolutely. And finally, there are constraints. And this is where you think about the guardrails. So what should it not do? Should it avoid buzzwords? Should it skip pricing? Should you keep it under 100 words? Those are all important.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So when you combine context, clarity, and constraints, the 3 C's, the AI is going to give you something actually useful instead of just generic filler. So getting specific is really the key to these solid outputs. And that's partly why we see those with expertise actually excel at AL, right? At AI, excuse me, because you have a better understanding of a situation and what you actually want. So this is why experience matters.
So here's a quick recap. Context. Think of this as the why and the who. Clarity. This is the what and how it should look and sound. And finally, constraints. This is what it is not supposed to do.
Yeah, and to be fair, especially if you're a creative like me, you don't always know what, the clarity you want. You might not know the tone, you might not know the exact constraints, and that's okay. You do want to give your AI flexibility to use its LLM-ness to give you something interesting. But like Sherry said, like the more guardrails you can kind of put around it, the more precise of a type of output you're going to get for what you're looking for. So like, let me give you an example. Let's say I wanted to write a cold email. I could ask, write a cold email about our software, right? And that would give me one response. Or imagine I said, write a 3-sentence cold email to a time-strapped VP of operations at a marketing company who's struggling with raw material costs. Make it punchy. In my case, it's obviously oftentimes snarky, and use an empathy-driven tone to end with a low-pressure CTA. So given those two options, which one of those do you think is going to give you a better result?
Well, I think we all know the answer to that. And that is a great example at how you give a great prompt to get great output. And guess what? You can also iterate with AI. You don't have to get it perfect the first time, and often we don't. You can say, make it more conversational, or add a stat in that first sentence, or how about you try again, only this time let's make it shorter.
Yeah, and again, this is like one of our big key learnings is you need to treat it like a conversation, not like a vending machine.
Yep, that's totally normal. And you can go back and forth 3 or 4 times. It's not failure. That's what we call collaboration.
Exactly. And you also don't need, in our opinion, to memorize these big prompt templates, but it does get helpful to have a few question starters in your back pocket just to kind of know how to jump in with chat.
Yeah, like what are 3 ways to fill in the blank? Or how about explain this like I am new in this industry? Or write this in the tone of someone who's really confident but not arrogant, maybe
Yeah, I like
snarky.
that. I like that a lot. And certainly that, new to the industry or we ask all the time, being in the service business about, different industries and how this works or a part of the process in another business works. And just to have an overall framework and insights into that is just so helpful in our everyday work. So let me give you a couple more examples of prompts that have the right context, clarity, and constraints. So how about this? I'm preparing for an internal marketing review, right? You've set the tone. Based on the attached Q2 report uploaded, summarize the top 3 insights that would matter to a skeptical CFO and point out any obvious gaps or red flags they might challenge. Okay? Like, how good do you think that's going to be, and how how well are you going to be prepared for that meeting because you went through that
Right.
exercise, right? Because the AI now knows the audience is a CFO, the goal is preparing for this review, and the tone should be sort of one that anticipates skepticism. So let me give you one more example, and then Sherry's back to you. Summarize this vendor pitch deck into a 30-second explanation I can use to brief my boss. My boss cares more about cost savings and implementation time. Skip the buzzwords and focus only on strategic value. Okay, again, in this case, We've clarified what matters most to the boss, and we've given AI constraints of being not fluffy and only getting the strategic takeaways out of it.
Really good examples.
Thank
So
you.
see, it's really not rocket science, it's not magic, but when you get as specific as you possibly can, AI becomes way more helpful and very quickly.
And actually, one of our favorite hacks is to ask ChatGPT how to prompt it. And we literally
Mhm.
type, what prompt would give me the best output if I want this type of return? And oftentimes what we'll do is we'll use the reasoning models, the O3 or O4 in the case of ChatGPT, to get the best prompts, and then we drop them into the 4.0 model, which is more of the conversational, everyday use ones. And it, like, honestly, it's like, help me help you. We've talked about that before, but that's what we
Exactly.
mean by that.
Right? Right? It's so meta and it's so useful.
Thank you. I think so too. And, if you're new to AI, this can be your first win. Learn to prompt well, and you instantly will get more value out of every tool you're using.
And if you want to go deeper, like building mini workflows that save you hours and hours, we've got the training for you at xpromos.com/AI.
But for now, here is your homework. We don't usually give homework in our podcast, but we're going for it today. We want you to pick one task you're doing this week, one task that's on your list already. It could be an email, it could be a social post, it could be a product summary, it could be fixing some nagging problem like I had with my sprinklers. And we want you to try prompting AI for help. We want you to use the 3 C's of context, clarity, and constraints. And then we want you to tweak the output until it works. And then we want you to think about how long that took you to do that versus doing that all on your own.
And that's it. It's really simple, it's doable, and a legit time saver.
And with that, today's episode is a wrap. Thank you for listening. And remember, you don't have to be a prompt engineer to make AI work for you.
That's right. Like and follow for more real world AI tips without the hype. See you next time.